It's another glorious day in our beloved city. And for those of you who are not here, I'm sorry that you're not with us. Dear Dave magazine is a magazine of photography and writing that I founded in 2007. We publish 3 times a year. Since COVID, we are only available on our website, individual issues and subscriptions, and I would like to encourage you all to go take a look. So without any further delay, I'm very happy to be here this afternoon with Matt Wilson. And by way of formal introduction, Matt Wilson is a British artist living here in New York. Exhibitions of his photographic work have occurred at the Galerie des Filles du Cavalier, please forgive that, in Paris at the International Photography Festival in Cardiff, the Moscow Photographer Biennale, and at the Leica Gallery also in Paris, as well as at the Jeonju Photography Festival in South Korea. The work has a strong presence here at the gallery sit-down booth and will be exhibited there in the very near future. So,
thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Have a chat.
Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure, real pleasure.
Yeah. Should we start with a description of your work? Would you mind?
Sure.
It's always interesting to hear how people describe their own work.
Well, some lady passed by my booth earlier and she said, this guy needs to learn how to focus, so it's...
Did she have very thick glasses, by chance?
She's like 20 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I'm trying to use photography, the medium of photography, to move away from photography, because my work is referencing the history of fine art painting, right, basically. And it's been a 30-year study of the analog medium and film and the manipulation of the medium, and kind of how it can tip its hat in that direction and maybe live in this space of the discussion between the relationship between photography and painting.
Right.
It's...
And the painting in particular, from what I can understand, is a 19th century landscape painting. John Constable seems to be a very strong
and this reference. Work that I'm currently working on is, so there's a residence festival. It's a pretty prestigious residence that you can't apply for, you have to be nominated for, and they invite 10 artists a year to go for a 6-week residence. It's in Deauville, and it's called Festival Planche Contact, run by a wonderful director whose name is Laura Serrani, whose ex-husband, François Hebel, was the person that started Raconte Art.
Okay.
So they're kind of deeply immersed in the history of photography and its presence in Europe.
And where's the residency, Matt?
It's in Deauville, which is in Normandy in France.
So you just came from you've done the residency. The work that's here, from what I understand, is
from that residency, which has kind of allowed me really to continue this pursuit of really engaging that conversation about the relativity between painting and photography.
Right.
But the references that I personally used were, I mean, aside from being English and I'm fairly familiar with the history of classical painting, it made me think, because the work that you make there has to be specific to Normandy and made within the confines of Normandy. So it made me think of what Normandy meant to the history of classical painting, being the birthplace of Impressionism. And then, of course, you look at all of them, from Monet to the pointillist movement of Pissarro. I mean, the list is endless. So it was really kind of trying to tip its hat specifically to the French Impressionists. Although there are references, I mean, I'm not suggesting the work is anywhere near like, but there's a personal reference to someone like Turner and the way he, just these expressive brushwork. And
do people ask you about your history as a visual artist? Or, I guess I'm trying to avoid asking you whether or not you were ever a painter.
Well, I was never a painter. However, my interest was always in painting, simply because, not for want of a better word, I had kind of a surrogate father who all he did when my brother and sisters were kids was all he did was paint and draw. Mm-hmm. And because he kind of, for the most part, brought us up to a large degree, he would give us painting classes and educate us on these painters and how to paint and draw. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of where the whole thing started for me, really was. And that was with the greats of Constable and...
Right. And I should mention that the pictures, I almost call them the paintings, the pictures are quite small. The pictures are of a modest scale.
Well, I'm not... For me, the work is really intimate. And I'm somebody that I don't actually feel this is within the photographic medium, especially contemporary. I don't feel that scale is something that's considered enough. I think that the work should dictate the scale, and I'm well aware of the tendency of big is of now, and which I have no problem with big as long as the image commands.
Sure. Scale is very important, and I remember a time that technology became such that it gave photographers the opportunity to make massive pictures and also compete in the marketplace for wall space with painters. And this was all well and good. It was an important transition, but you're right. I think the scale of the picture is as important as the volume in music and a passage of music.
Look, I think it depends. The work calls for it. And my favorite thing to do when I'm in Europe and I'm maybe in Paris is, I spend all my time at Musée d'Orsay or the Louvre. The most interesting works for me, they're that big. Yeah. And because because they do draw you in, because they do force you to have this intimate dialogue.
Right.
I mean, that for me is just, and I try and have used that as a reference. Again, tipping my hat to that tradition.
Well, to me, they reference two things. They really do feel like easel paintings.
Yeah.
I go again with the word painting, but it feels like a particular practice that is especially associated with reproducing or with painting in the air, as it's but they also remind me of reproductions of something, which is a very strange feeling. It feels like this sort of painterly reproduction print, let's say, that people have in, I don't know, let's say in rural houses in the 1930s.
No, I mean, very much so. Someone described them yesterday as the likeness to these old vintage postcards that her grandmother used to have. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, that, it is referencing all of that.
Absolutely. But rather than a postcard, to me, it feels almost like a calendar picture. And I don't mean that.
Okay,
I don't mean that in a negative.
Yeah.
But just the kind of, they're almost generic landscape scenes that I think populated the kitchens of rural America throughout the 30s, 40s.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
It absolutely is.
No, absolutely. I mean, I completely get what you're saying. It's, I mean, it's always interesting that, you take all these inspirations and for me, most of them, I absorb still a lot. But what's interesting for me is how much you absorb subconsciously and then how that comes out. But, these are all the things that I explore and look at what we're talking about. Sure. And, even wandering through the old flea markets and it's all visual and it's all food that you take in.
Does it ever, so you have a very, very specific aesthetic.
Yeah.
And the aesthetic is both in what you choose to represent, how you represent it, the sort of the romantic historical vocabulary. Do you ever feel as an artist that you're limiting yourself? I mean, presumably you could not take a picture at Kennedy Airport, let's say, because it doesn't fulfill certain pictorial?
It's a it's a very good question. For me, I'm still in the early stages of exploring the medium, and it's 30 years on, you know,
Yeah.
and because this is where I get kind of turn into a little bit of a geek, is like I had such a love affair and such a passion for the study of the construction of texture and grain within the analog medium.
Right.
And so I think, you know, whilst this current work is specifically tipping its hat to classical painting, I like to think that will continually change. And, you know, it is a never-ending study, and every time I make new work, because I spend so long with it, and I go in the dark room and I make all these tests, and then I'll do high-res scans just to explore what it is I have on the negative.
Right.
That kind of, for me, has a tendency that it gives birth to its own new interpretation, which you can apply to anything. So without being too vague, what I've recently been playing with this idea that I haven't made any work except for test prints and stuff to sit with myself, is that then all of a sudden I'm playing with these very abstract images that are of the tapestry of color and grain and texture.
Would you take that to its logical conclusion and perhaps make a picture without any clear subject?
That's the idea that I'm working on, and I think then you're open to exploring a whole new wealth of imagery, or you know what I mean? Because it's going to be abstract, and because then you're playing with a completely different. It's not a landscape, or the reference is a lot more subtle.
Sure. And clearly you really enjoy the pleasure of, it's almost a kind of ritualized photographic activity of playing in the darkroom and playing with the materials. Apparently you use outdated analog film.
Yeah, not because it's outdated film. I mean, I began my photographic career in the early 90s when, you know, prior to the digital revolution, I was trained in analog. And back then you had an absolute abundance of different film types, different speeds, different manufacturers that all have a different identity. And once my formal training was over and I'd been taught all the technical parameters of, okay, these are the rules, and this is the temperature you process at, and this is how you expose film.
Right.
My natural tendency was then to explore, paying attention and with knowledge, what happens if you break all those rules? And then what does that give you? Because exposing something incorrectly, but then processing it correctly, will give you a whole different palette to play with than would you exposing correctly.
Right. But of course, you're not just playing with dials. You know, this is a very tactile, very intuitive process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I come from my family's background is, you know, my father, my grandfather. I mean, they were really, and I don't say it simply because they were my relations, but because of the people they were. They come from a tradition of artisanal craftsmen. And so I grew up with this kind of intent of learning not only how to use your hands, but the importance and quality of tactility and something well made.
Right.
And so that, I've always just taken that approach, which is why the darkroom played such, you know, again, the darkroom is something, my tendency, I think of the darkroom as a playpen, and it's a place to get lost and explore think outside the box and just play and enjoy and maybe employ things within that environment that have nothing to do with photography.
Right. Right.
Whether it's...
Do you, are you inspired by literature at all? Because there is a literary quality to the work, and it reminds me of certain narratives that take place in the past, whether it's Hawthorne or Melville or...
I am a big fan of literature. One of my favorite authors is John Fante, who I read a lot. John Fante.
Okay.
You know him?
No.
So John, they say, Charles Bukowski always said, without John Fante, I wouldn't exist. John Fante lived and worked in the Great Depression. He lived in downtown Los Angeles.
Really?
And his novels are absolutely tremendous, really, really tremendous. And
are they considered noir?
I guess they are.
Okay.
I guess they are to some degree. And then, I love Ray Carver. And,
Yeah.
I mean, because they're so visual,
Sure.
and the way that they articulate themselves is so eloquent, but they conjure up this imagery, and it's, the older I get, the more I read, and
But not to be obvious about it, but you're talking about, I guess there's some other bodies of work other than what you have here that explore a more American 1930s, 1940s. I mean, your work seems so tied to place and then a particular time as well, and the confluence of those two. Maybe it is a kind of literary narrative.
Well, yeah. I mean, and a big inspiration to me is cinema, and music also equally. But I tend to I guess I gravitate to the things that made a big impression on me as a younger man, or as a adolescent, or
of course.
And and I grew up in that period where you had the cinema of the golden age of what they call the golden age of American cinema. So I grew up with the films of Sam Peckinpah, who, I mean, if you talk about a guy that just broke all the rules, and but visually for me, Peckinpah, along with...
Is Peckinpah, the one thing I think about with Peckinpah is Straw Dogs.
Yeah, of course.
Which, of course, is a very violent.
Yes.
Is there ever violence in your work, or
I would never really say that there's violence in my work. However, a lot of the work that I make, not so much of late, but definitely with my Stateside series, which was kind of a modern-day exploration. I called it the exploration of the dissolution of the American dream. And it was specifically because it was going to these places where, there is no economy.
Right.
And they're very much off the beaten path places that people don't go to. I mean, the people live in small towns or shanty towns, and there's nothing there. I mean, there's no reason to go there.
Sure.
But that was maybe inspired by the literature I choose to read and the films that I grew up with. And, I naturally, upon moving to the States, I just had this natural curiosity to explore.
Sure.
And
I think that American culture, for better or worse, has been so embedded in the visual culture around the world.
Absolutely.
That I've heard over the years from so many people that when they came to New York, when they came to US, when they came to Las Vegas, LA, that at first they couldn't quite see the place because they were just seeing the fiction of the place.
Right.
They were seeing the way that the place had been represented.
Well, it's also considered, in France,
Right.
the French consider that American, they consider it exotic, and they have this fascination with it. It's really interesting.
Is it possible that your work is as, we tend to compartmentalize people, and forgive me for that, but I wonder if your work is as French as it is British. And I don't know what, I hope I don't have to define what that means, but...
You know, France is somewhere, it's a country that I have a little bit of an affinity with. I mean, I enjoy it.
And you've exhibited a lot there.
It was France that gave me a career, really, because I was discovered by, or my work was discovered by a lady called Christine Ollier, who is and has been for a long time a driving force within the photographic community in France. She was once, originally when I met her, the director of a very big Parisian gallery called Galerie Les Filles du Calvaire.
Whose pronunciation I believe
You got
murdered, but yeah.
No, it was close enough.
Yeah.
But I had the opportunity. You know, I was somebody that, you know, I would in my younger years assist photographers to pay the rent. I'd save money. I'd go off and do my little travels of what interested me. I simply, you know, took a camera to record those experiences and journeys. And essentially I had no desire to try and immediately carve out this career. Mm-hmm. It was more that I was simply making work for me. Yeah. And then, but it lasted for a long time, and also because I wanted to really understand what it was I was looking for and to develop a style of my own that.
Have you done any work for travel magazines?
No.
There was a time when Condé Nast Traveler, for example, first came on the marketplace that I think they were trying to redefine travel photography, and your work again is so evocative of a particular.
I mean, it's kind of funny because you know I have you know, being in New York and being a photographer, especially in the '90s. Mm-hmm. All my friends, well, a great percentage of my friends were photographers. Most of them worked for these magazines, outside magazines. I mean, they would just travel all over the place constantly. And they were always like, you know, put a portfolio together, do this. And I'd put a portfolio together of the images that I liked.
Right.
And they would always say, oh, you should go see the galleries. And I don't know whether that meant I wasn't commercially safe enough or it was too just... I could never get a read on that.
The whole binary between art and commerce has been such a burden.
Yeah, it was just a struggle for me, and I could never. I mean, maybe it did me a favor. I don't know. You know, it just what that meant for me was that all I could do was just concentrate on the work that I was trying to make.
Sure. So it might have been a lucky thing.
Yeah, it just kept it really personal. You know.
Yeah. If you were described, if your work was described as being romantic, would you object to that?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
So.
No, I mean, again, you know, it's a lot of the art. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, I'm stuck in the past and all I look at is traditional painting. I mean, I love art and I absorb art.
I was expecting you to show up in a 19th century outfit.
Came close. But no, I mean, look, you know, it's. I mean, I don't take that in a negative way. It's something that I greatly appreciate. I mean, I love that period in art. You know, I love those painters, and you know, Turner. I mean, one of the greatest romantic painters of all time.
It might be interesting or appropriate to think of you as a historian of sorts. There's so much emphasis placed on what is new in photography, whereas I think with your historical references and your sense of the past.
I just think it's. I think that, you know, it's. I'm trying to think how to word this. I just think that knowledge is. I think knowledge is very precious, and I think there are a lot of people that try and kind of jump too far ahead without an understanding of what came before. And for me, you know, I'm not suggesting that one should always relate to the past, but I think it's just. I mean, it's no different with education. You know, I print out of a lab where they teach a lot of classes. I see a lot of students come through there. There have been times when I'm working on an image, and you know, it's interesting to me. It's maddening to me. You know, I will be printing an image this big. I will spend 2 weeks every day working on that image.
Wow.
Just different possibilities,
Sure.
different diffusions, different ways of looking, different colours.
What is the addition of the work?
Well, there's always always 2 editions, sometimes 3 editions, and they will. So the very small ones are editions of 10. The larger ones, which are still fairly intimate, are 1 of 6.
Okay.
Generally, it stops there. There are, on occasion, images that demand the scale, and they will be editions of 4. So they're very small. The editions themselves are intimate.
And considering the fact that there's so much labor that goes into each print, I assume that you make all of them at once. So,
yes. Always, because technically, I mean, you can match print, but you know what's happening to the analog medium now. I mean, you know, Kodak now have stopped. So 20 years ago, you could go and buy all different papers, have consecutive emulsions, so you could match, and you just can't do that today. Because it doesn't exist. You can't buy it.
But one of the things that occurs to me about your work and listening to you also talk about it is that there's an authenticity to all of this. I remember when Instagram had a particular filter that made everything look old. And for whatever reason, it seemed to be very, very popular. I mean, it's been curious also to watch, as someone involved in photographic education, the more technological the photographic landscape becomes, the more that antiquarian processes and procedures become explored. But the way that you describe your involvement with the image and with the rendering of the image, this is a very authentic undertaking. It's not just going after a style.
No, I mean, I'm constantly exploring, and I had the good fortune of learning to print when, I mean, it still exists today, but not like it did 20 years ago, where, people had, I mean, the labs were number one, the labs were in New York City were dark rooms. When I say labs, they're open 24/7. I mean, really 24/7. And those labs were full of professional printers that printed work for other photographers. And what that meant for me was that was another classroom for me, because there were all these techniques that are now, for the best part, lost, because those people are no longer printing and passed on. And
which is true in so many different industries. I remember in Varick Street, where I had a studio in the 90s, it used to be just filled with printing presses. That was the seat of the printing industry. They're not there anymore.
No. But I think the knowledge, I think sometimes what, especially the younger generation, can miss, the understanding of analog is the foundation of an understanding, or can be a better foundation for the understanding of digital when it comes to photography and exposing. And, I mean, I get asked a lot in the darkroom, you'll have young students in there, and I've noticed that, because I have my little bag of tricks and I'm doing these things, and I spend so long working on one image, and they'll be like, well, how do you do that? But they expect there's an immediacy and they don't want to put the work. And my answer is always the same.
We could very easily sound like old timers.
No. But I always try and infuse them to say, like, this room's a playground. You just play, enjoy it, and it's.
Do you consider yourself to be nostalgic? And
does that
question get posed frequently?
There's definitely a nostalgia to my work, for sure. Absolutely. For sure.
There's a terrific book that I made a note of it. It's called The Future of Nostalgia. And it's by a woman named Svetlana Boym, B-O-Y-M. It's a terrific book. And even the title, The Future of Nostalgia, I think captures some of the wit and some of the intelligence that she writes. But I wanted to stay for another moment on this idea of the past. And forgive me, but I hope this isn't irritating. I'm gonna read something to you that I wrote about photography in the past.
Okay.
Because I think the eternal present glides into the past immediately. The photograph memorializes this transaction, this fugitive moment. The intimacy with the previous is the common denominator of all photographs. For some, Eugene J., Wright Morris, Andrew Moore, the act of photography is in pursuit of a subject in the process of vanishing, becoming relic, already an inventory of the past, and the photograph transforms this disappearance into appearance, if not a form of permanence. It is a diagram through time where past and the future converge. Mm-hmm. Anyway, forgive me, but a lot of different thoughts there. But again, I think that the photography's relationship, and it's fairly common knowledge, with the past is very important.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of past. There's the immediate Instagram past, but there's also a strong sense of historical past.
Yeah, yeah.
And also a longing for the past.
Well, I grew, again, and I completely forgot about this until you just said that. Mm-hmm. You know, in my grandmother's house when I grew up, she had a ripped, tatty old plastic bag that was huge. Uh-huh. It was literally 60 years, I'm talking about, this is in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. There were photographs in there dating back to the 1800s, but it was her, instead of being in a lovely album,
sure,
they were just all these amazing old photographs of generations of
Where
our
are
family.
they now? Where are those photographs?
I wasn't there when she passed away, but they got thrown out in the dumpster.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, which is heartbreaking. I mean, some of them have salvaged because, you know, I'd asked for several ones that were kind of meaningful to me. You know, I have one that's framed in my office. So my grandfather, who is sitting in a Willys Jeep. Mm-hmm. The date is the 6th of June, 1944.
Wow.
And it's prior to the Normandy landing.
Yeah. But there's also something that I try to suggest in this, is that there are also, we understand that if we make a photograph right now, mm-hmm. that this water bottle is going to be, 10 years from now, it's going to be so much in the past.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a form of photography, is that you're not making pictures of the present, but you're making pictures of the past. Mm-hmm. One could argue that if you photograph this room because of the antiquarian nature of this room, you're photographing the past, and that picture then becomes the past. Mm-hmm. And so again, I call it a kind of cross-section through time.
Yeah.
You're making pictures in the present, in the 21st century, that feel like 19th century pictures.
Yeah.
But then your pictures will then be 15 years from now will become the past again. It's almost a compounding of the past.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I constantly reference the past, and there is a constant sense of nostalgia in it.
But it does seem like your work is an homage to your ancestors. I don't mean to be glib, but
no. I mean, it is. I mean, you know, listen, I'm just a product of where I come from, and I'm extremely faithful and proud of that kind of artisanal history of where I come from, and the abilities and sensitivities that opened up to me. You know.
Right.
And I employ that in today and tomorrow, and the best I can. And you know, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting when you do the fairs, you know, or if you have shows, and you know, it's interesting to sit back and look at who the work resonates with. Mm-hmm. And it's from young to old. I mean, it's right across the board, you know, and they all appreciate it for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? It's what this means to me is going to mean different to you, and vice versa.
But you're setting the conversation. You're saying this is, this is the framework of what I want to discuss.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I become, as we talk, I become aware that the work is not just a pictorial device, but it's also an homage to a sort of handcraft, a handcraftedness, and the intelligence the intelligence that connotes.
Yeah, I think that was the ethos that I was brought up with, especially by my father, because he was this, master craftsman, I would call him. And his ability, and my father was somebody that he didn't care what you did, as long as you did it. Number one, as long as you loved it, and number two, which was on par with number one, you did it to the absolute best of your ability. He had no time for people that did things halfway. You do it 100% or you don't do it.
It's such a simple and righteous.
Yeah. I grew up in that house, so it was love what you do and do it the best.
Do it well.
And
so
I lived with that.
your work carries that ethos forward.
I like to think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if that is what it is, then I'd be quite happy with that. I mean, I think he would be.
Good.
Bless him wherever he is.
Yeah. Well, that might be a good place to end.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
I think that's a terrific sentiment to have in the world at this moment.
Well, I really appreciate
Okay,
the
good to talk to
opportunity.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye, folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Not too bad.
What?
Not too bad.
No, it's really good. Yeah.
No, it was.
I mean, I enjoy this sort of, and again, that's, I think not having, the work being projected and you explain it allows us to sort of go into.
It just opens up a freedom, doesn't it? And also a little bit more.